And we are live. Good afternoon. It's the Reactionary Grounds. We got Larry, Meat Cutter, and Big Mac. How y'all doing today?
Doing well, comrade.
Doing well. Straight from my mom's basement again.
Epic. So, just the three of us tonight, but we thought we'd maybe lay out some of the ideas that we have as well that we didn't mention last time about the kind of society that we're maybe aiming for to some extent. What does it mean to be a reactionary? We can talk about the gays, the transgenders, and maybe some other things as well. So, yeah, guys. So maybe you guys could lay out kind of your ideas for what it means to be a reactionary and how we distinguish ourselves from conservatives or libertarians.
Well, I would say that reactionary implies something very different from what we've seen among modern American conservatives. They don't act. There's no action implied in the name conservative. It is allowing the old world to die rather than creating something new that is better, that removes the Marxist filth that's destroyed our society. So when I think of reactionary, it is hashing out a plan to deal with cultural Marxism in a way that conservatism has failed to do, uprooting all of these degenerate ills that are plaguing our society now, with the memory of the past, but with a vision for the future.
Yeah. What about you, Larry? That was Meat Cutter. What about Larry?
Right. So I'll second most of what Meat Cutter said. I would say that this can be a vexing topic that is deserving of a couple episodes in itself to treat justly and thoroughly, and certainly there's been numerous treatises that have been authored just trying to define what a reactionary is, what conservatism is. I think Russell Kirk said that conservatism was basically trying to, and I'm going to butcher this, preserve a particular people in a particular place at a particular time. I would say that I don't like this characterization much. I think it's limiting in the same way that Meat Cutter, I guess, alluded to. It's limiting in that sense. I will say that there is a characterization of reactionary or conservative that I do like, and this is straight from one of Evola's seminal works, Men Among the Ruins, where from this is of course sensitive to the era that he was living in, but he was referring to the revolutions of 1789 and 1848 in France and then Central Europe respectively, and that he was a reactionary in the sense that he wanted to instigate a counter revolution against that. And this is the context in which I see ourselves in right now. There are things that are much more recent than those things that occurred in the 18th and 19th centuries. But nonetheless, as Meat Cutter said, they have been plaguing us and they have been leading to our decline, and we have to react against them. That is the sense in which I am a reactionary. I mean, you can name, X, Y, and Z. You could name, the changes that occurred in the U.S. in the 1920s, and then you can name the changes that occurred in the U.S. in the 1960s. But broadly speaking, I view them all as one cascade of malevolence, and I view us as being kind of the vanguard of what is right and true that stands in contrast to that malevolence. So that's my abstract sort of rambling about that.
Yeah, and to add to what Meat Cutter and Larry are saying, with the reactionary approach, we're going back and reviewing some of the premises that were already taken for granted at those times, things that weren't really made explicit at the time because they didn't need to be, and now we've come to a point where we kind of have to. We're looking at what went wrong, so we're retracing our steps to see where we went down the wrong path, and we're trying to go back in time to the point where um, maybe where we should retrace our steps to, so that we don't continue to go down this wrong path. So some of those things would be premises such as tribalism, um, and religion intertwined with governance, as opposed to secularism, where you have this formal separation of the state power from the religious authority and the religious belief. Um, we maybe didn't, of course, have a formal relationship with the church in the U.S. ever, but there was an understanding that this was a Christian nation at the very least. And so, but that was just understood, and so they didn't really write it into the Constitution. But I guarantee you that the founders never would have condoned or tolerated, or certainly not the average citizen at that time would have ever tolerated or expected that religious freedom should entail safe haven to Satanists or witches or any of this weird shit. So I mean, but it was just understood. That was a precept that, or a premise that everybody held to be true without saying it. And you don't have to say that you breathe air. We all know it. So uh, reactionary means revisiting some of these premises that have been forgotten and been obscured and blurred, so that now we've gotten to this point where we're down this wrong path because everybody forgot those premises have slipped away, and the things as well like tribalism, and that was more explicit in the founding documents. I mean, you watch some of the stuff Jared Taylor says about what the founding fathers really meant. I mean, he gives a pretty good rundown of some of the lines in the Declaration and the Constitution and just the writings of the founders who recognized the reality of race and understood the differences, and that they never had any intention um, of it being a multiracial nation, you know, or of it being a nation that could withstand, or that this republic could withstand demographic shifts. And they certainly understood it to be an inheritance that they were passing down to their descendants. It was not just for anybody. I mean, they made this nation for their children, for their children's children. That's who they were, and this leads to the other aspect that's important. I guess it's still tribalism, but this very, and Nick Fuentes does a good job talking about this we've evolved into this, or probably devolved into this perspective on America, which is that it's simply some kind of political experiment. It's an experiment in the sense that some of the innovations, there were innovations and it was some new stuff to an extent, but it was never meant to be some kind of freaking lab. I mean, we're not lab rats. They didn't see it as some kind of just fully an experiment. It was only an experiment in the sense that there were some different things that had not been tried before, but it wasn't just supposed to be some kind of um, attempt to see if it would work or not. They fully wanted it to work because they cared about people. They cared about family. This is about people's lives, people's well-being. It's not just about some political thesis. This isn't a college controlled experiment in a lab. This is real life with real people who have families and lives. This was about people. And the political philosophy was part of the undergirdle that set up the framework for us to create this body politic. But the body politic served the people. The people don't serve this political experiment. Insofar as this body politic is an experiment or not, either way, it aims toward the good of the people and their families. So this is definitely about blood. It's about soil. It's about your family and your descendants and what you pass down to them. Not some like, oh, let's toy around with some abstract ideas because we're a bunch of professors or something. No, it's not the university. This is real life, I think, and certainly the founders were political philosophers and very advanced in those things. But I think they as well They created it for themselves and their prosperity. As they said, it was about people. So getting back to what's tangible, what really matters to real people, not professors or fucking nerds in the university, but the average person that this republic was created for. So yeah, getting back to getting in touch with family, with blood, with soil, with just truth in general, racial reality, which was taken for granted, the importance of religion as it affects the nation and the nation's longevity, survivability, and prosperity, the relationship between religion and liberty, which Lord Acton, he talks about that relationship really well, the importance of religion for liberty and vice versa. And of course, religion supersedes everything. It's what's most important. However, as a secondary result is that if you have good Christian religion, you will have the virtue to enjoy these liberties that we enjoy in America. So, to me, that's what means to be a reactionary. Throw off this. We went down the wrong path with this formal secularism, this obsession over secularism and governance, as well as the abandonment of the tribal understanding of man, and just the cognitive dissonance that we now have with the ignoring of the racial reality that we face. To me, that's all reactionary. Basically, going back to the perspective that's always been had in the West up until pretty recently, and our buddy Natty Bumpo, who couldn't make it again this time, but he will be joining us. But he would make a good point about how you can't just artificially return to a certain point in time. History does move forward in the sense that you can never go back to a point that's already passed. Things change, and it's never going to be the same as it was. We live in this time now when this is kind of a little fantasy that people on the alt-right or just the dissident right in general, traditionalists have, which is that let's just go back to 1950. And of course, you'll have the debate, well, things were already wrong in the 50s because of the philosophical changes that had already happened in the course of the 100 years before that, and before that, the Enlightenment. So, you get into that, and it's like, well, we got to return to the 1700s. It's just absurd. So we have to move forward, but we have to figure out a way to, in some way, kind of course correct without the fantasy of changing to a different time in the past. We still have to course correct. So I think that this channel definitely it's a political activism nexus for rallying, organizing, and directing the disparate commentators and followings in our broad movement. So it's definitely political, but we should also talk about culture, about religion, because those things inform. It's a feedback loop where politics affects culture and religion, but it goes the other way even more so, I would say. Politics is more so downstream from culture and religion than the other way around. They do affect each other, but and right now it may be a necessity that we change the politics to allow the culture and the religion to flow down to politics, because right now they're really restrained by the politics. With the religious and cultural expression is itself restrained so that it cannot flow really in any way down to politics. It's held down. So politics is important, but we don't want to have a superficial change. We want to have really a civilizational course correction, which is deep, far-reaching, and it involves art, music, education, the great books, philosophy, all these things that underpin a true robust civilization, not just a 20-year change. So that's my long rambling. Did you have anything more to say, Meat Cutter? Because Larry and I talked a while, but
Absolutely. All of this can be summed up under the umbrella of identity. All of these things are interconnected. A racial identity, a religious identity, and the politics that emanate from it. That is who a people are. And it's far beyond the materialism we've been fed and taught to accept as a replacement. It doesn't work. It leaves people depressed, emasculated, and weak. And we need to obliterate what makes us weak if we're ever going to succeed.
Yes. I'd agree with that. With the racial issue and our people, our racial identity. Our buddy Philippe, who also is not here right now, but he has raised a good point when we've talked with them in private circles about how the racial component has definitely informed the religious component as well. Even the Roman Catholicism, or just the general Christianity of the West that we hold so dear in our civilization, is so central to who we are as Westerners, our Christianity. That as well. I mean, the Roman Catholic, the Holy Roman Empire, developed in Europe, and so it's debatable whether that could have formed in Africa. It's debatable, really not debatable. It didn't, and I don't think it would have formed in Africa. It would not have spontaneously formed there as it did, as it evolved in Europe, and probably not in Asia either. We don't know those hypotheticals, but all we know is that the Holy Roman Empire emerged in Europe. And so, there may be something to be said for the importance of the white race for Europeans existing in order for the Roman Catholic Church and, broadly spoken, Christianity to survive, because that's where it emerged into prominence, and its magnitude was increased so greatly to be spread across the world was through the work of the Europeans. So some people say that religion is the core. Some people say race is the core of it all. It's pretty tricky it's kind of a chicken or the egg kind of problem. Obviously, I'm Catholic. I believe that Christ he's paramount. He's the end, and he's the means as well for anything good. And he's what I aim for as a Catholic. But there is something to be said for how Catholicism, Christianity emerged in the West, in Europe, and was spread by Europeans. So, they're both very important. We don't necessarily have to distinguish, what is most fundamental as far as the continued existence of Christianity or the continued existence of the white race. They're both very important. We as a people deserve as much as anybody to exist. We have a right to defend our lives, to exist. That's natural law. So, and as well, we're Catholics or we're Christians, so we have to fight for our religion. But these are both very Western things. To be white, to be Christian, very, very, very European. So we need to fight for both those things. And if we want to transition into the question of what kind of society we aim for, we want to aim for a society that's, in my mind, you guys can add what you want to add or disagree where you want to disagree, but it seems to me that we want an edified society. We want a society that protects the innocence of children, that raises children to be men, and men who are not perverts, who are productive, who are hardworking, who are self-sacrificing, dutiful, and loyal, and that involves a moral component, which is not simply racial. So we need both, but that segues as well into the gay question, the transgender question. That's kind of ground zero for this fight. That's the logical starting point. It's so perverted. Everybody hates it who's got a normal head on their shoulders. And it's, we have a just cause. I mean, that's something we should be grateful for. And I've heard this said before. I'm kind of lifting it from, I can't remember who, but we should be grateful that we have such a just cause to fight for. Sometimes things are kind of, not very black and white. They're kind of gray, kind of fuzzy. You don't know exactly. It's not clear cut what you ought to do. We have a very clear cut purpose, and that should give us encouragement that our cause is righteous and just. There's no question about what we're doing is right here. We have to throw these weirdos back in the closet, man. It's enough. It's perverting our children. It's corrupting our culture. So, what do you guys think about the aims of the society? What are the aims, the broad aims of our movement toward a certain society, generally speaking? And also, what are your thoughts on how to deal with the degenerates, the weirdos, the homos, and the transgenders?
Well, I mean, so I think there were a lot of good ideas that were introduced and commented on here. A very interesting statistic I saw from maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, maybe a couple months, was when it was written, was that the suicide rate among teenage girls had tripled from around 2000 to 2017. And of course, us being, I guess, all millennials here, I believe. If Meat Cutter, are you a millennial? I believe Meat Cutter is
Yes.
a millennial too. Okay. Know that from 2000 to 2017, there were a lot of further changes that were put into that occurred. Besides that of the ones that we talk about a lot, which were the changes in the 1960s. There was kind of, I remember, for instance, being in middle school, and maybe you guys too, where the word fag, for instance, was kind of thrown around casually. No one really thought
Back in
much
the good old days.
right. No one thought much of it. And what I'm getting at here is, so how are these two things related? What I'm getting at here is, in a way, I think our cause and our movement ends with identity, in the sense that a a a people who is healthy, a people who strives for meaning, a people with an upward trajectory will, by necessity, by virtue of those traits, understand that it is of vital importance to be part of the creation of a future that their descendants want to live in. A people who is a people who is thinking correctly, a people who is seeing clearly, will almost naturally be inclined to do that. So I think, and this is where I turn things inward. The solution to the gay question, or to the J question, or to all of the other outstanding unresolved questions we have, really begins internally. And as you alluded to, Big Mac, if the an edified society, it's in a sense, it's what we're aiming for, but by another token, that is the type of thing that perpetuates an edified society. The greatest crime that our enemies did was basically hijack that and start to feed us other things. And once they had control of our institutions, it was our own moral corruption in a variety of different senses, our own moral corruption that collectively pulled us down, that was an albatross around our necks and pulled us down and sunk us. So I think removing that requires something that Meat Cutter alluded to, which is the will and the volition to overcome. And in a way, once those tasks have been done, I think nature will take over. Our natural instincts will tell us how to treat women and how women should treat us. Our natural instincts will tell us what to do with the gay question, what to do with alien elements in our society. But and in that sense, I think this is how our movement ends with identity. Once we are awake, we will be able to see clearly, and we will do what is necessary. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah. Good.
Absolutely. Very good points, Larry. I think one thing we miss a lot, we forget to mention, is how this global homo agenda affects men in general, of all, of straight white men. It's infecting our social circles. And when we tolerate this, when we tolerate different degrees of it, whether it just be a lone faggot or a pedophile everyone's trying to befriend, those degrees are, with each degree of tolerance, we lose our masculine core in that social circle. All the men who do what white men ought to do. It's and it drains our energy. It is there to drain our energy. So I think it's important that we're vocal and we don't allow them to corner us this way. That we take steps to engage these people and debate them and show that we are not tolerant of their presence in our social circles and not tolerant of what they're willing to do in our society. And this can be started with people who advocate for it, for try to invite us to pride parades or whatever just to piss us off. That's where it starts. It starts within your own social circles.
Yes.
That's how we start this revolution.
Yeah, and preferably the way to do it is when you can do it alone when you confront these people, but even better if you can is to have at least one, maybe a couple friends with you when you confront these people in a larger setting, because even people kind of do respect it in a way when a lone kind of wolf you know reacts negatively, or stands up against something that's popular, like fawning over the gays or the weirdos. But if you're just a lone wolf, for the most part, 10% of it is respect, 90% of it is uh, revulsion. Like people are repulsed by it because they say he's an outlier, he's a weirdo. They want to run away from you. So you still kind of box yourself in, you corner yourself as a pariah when you do that as just a lone guy to an extent, because people tend to be kind of sheep in that way, where they want to stay in the norm, in the mainstream. They don't want to be an outcast. They don't want to expend their social capital tagging along with a weirdo, leaving friends, or whatever. So it has a greater effect if you can say you've got a group of 10 people and you got, everybody's fawning over some weirdo, some homo or something, or a transgender weirdo, and then you are a part of that group and you have a friend of yours who's like-minded to you, preferably at least one, even two. And then, so it's you and one or two other allies in a group of, 5 or 10 or more, and then you got a weirdo. And then, with the support of a buddy or two of yours, you confront this weirdo, because that sets up a different optics where it seems less ridiculous in the eyes of passive observers who are more mainstream and less courageous to say these things, when they see that there's not just one guy but a few. It makes it seem more mainstream, more reasonable. So that to me is the ideal. We got to move in packs. We got to stay together and support each other. And I think the same thing about these some of these new order Novus Ordo masses within the new you might say post-conciliar Catholic Church, the mainstream church. These abuses that you see, whether it's with the reverence toward the Blessed Sacrament, or just any of the lack of reverence toward our Lord in the Mass, with just the casualness and the lack of attention to detail and just downright disrespect. What has to happen, what ought to happen, and it happened in the past too, but it has to keep happening with renewed effort, is not just one guy like you or me goes up to the priest after Mass, but several guys surround him. A few strong-willed men who know their theology to some extent, at least on the issue they want to confront the priest about, and a few of them together. First, you should always confront the priest privately. it says that in the Bible, that first you go to the man one-on-one in private, and if that doesn't work, you go to higher and higher levels to eventually pressure the priest or whoever the infractor is, to pressure him in the eyes of the parish body, the community. But that's like kind of the last resort. So first you do the civil way, and you go to him one-on-one in private, and if he still won't conform, which most of these revolutionary, modernist priests won't, then eventually you should get a couple of your traditional buddies and confront this priest after mass, the 3 of you or 4 of you or more, hopefully, and kind of surround him. And it'll create a spectacle, but it'll be much more convincing to the onlookers, to the observers, when they see him surrounded by several people, than if they just see some weirdo by himself. It's like, who's this guy? He's just some freak came out of nowhere. Who cares about him? But the optics are important there. We should try to move in groups when we have these confrontations. We're better when we move in like pairs or groups together, if you can find that, if you can manage that. For the optics side of it, for basically making the normies comfortable to come toward us, so we don't just look like pariahs alone. Sometimes that's hard because sometimes the allies are far and few between, or few and far between, I should say. But yeah, and maybe we can change subjects a bit here. I recalled something that our buddy Natty Bumpo was talking to me about in private a while back, and he probably would have liked to have said something like this during this conversation. So I'll speak on his behalf. I'll try and speak well for him. He talked about how aristocracy is important, and I will grant that I'm not a fan of Richard Spencer personally. I think that he's the degenerate. He's done some good things, don't get me wrong. He has been thought-provoking, and I think that he has made some good points about even what really got my mind turning was the importance of privilege. People say, white privilege is, your average conservative will say, we don't have any privilege. I work for everything I got. But the truth is, and I think Richard Spencer really, he articulates it pretty well, which is that, and this is really also kind of a forgotten conservative principle, which is that no man is an island unto himself. And really, you can't really get anything in life without some degree of nepotism or without some degree of people giving you stuff that you didn't earn. Your parents, your associates who give you a chance at that job, when you maybe don't have any work experience. They give you training. They invest in you. It wasn't something you earned. You were given things. Things were passed down to you. You inherited things. You inherited a nice neighborhood that you could walk around with your kids in, or when you were growing up, you were safe to walk around in a nice neighborhood that wasn't a ghetto or wasn't a war zone. These are things that had nothing to do with you. It's a privilege that you enjoy. And so, yeah, the whole white privilege thing it's legit. It's true. We should be great. That's kind of what we're fighting for. We want the privileges associated with a white civilization, a European Western civilization, that are benefits that we wouldn't be able to enjoy in a fully multiracial civilization. That's not even really, it's like an oxymoron. There's no civilization will really emerge or survive that's multiracial. It'll be something short of a civilization, but a multiracial, I don't know, area is not going to have those kinds of privileges. So anyway, so I like some of the things Spencer has said. He's made good points, but I don't like how he's involved with the Satanists. I don't like how he's a cheater. I don't like how he's a drunkard and into drugs and just not Christian at all. So he's not, in my opinion, a good leader. We should look for better leaders. We need better leaders. And I think he's toxic, despite some of the good ideas that he's espoused. But anyways, he has also mentioned the importance of aristocracy, and our buddy Natty Bumpo kind of has spoken to me about that pretty articulately as well, which is that aristocracy is important, and it should be distinguished from an oligarchy. Aristocracy is not just a bunch of rich people. I mean, because that doesn't distinguish it from a plutocracy or an oligarchy. An oligarchy can be a few rich people, a few rich rulers. We kind of have a technocratic oligarchs, Facebook, Google, monopolists, and a few other, multi-billionaires control so much. They're oligarchs, and then you got plutocracy. But aristocracy has a familial or a blood. It's a blood component. Aristocracy is connected to the land. It's connected to the people, to the family in the area. The South the pre-Civil War South had a great aristocracy, which was the bulwark of traditional American Protestant civilization. And that aristocracy was destroyed during the Civil War. And Natty Bumppo argued, I thought pretty convincingly, that that's why we can't hope to artificially just kind of reinsert ourselves at a point in time and just try to be traditional like we were, try to fight for political victories to establish a traditional society as it was pre-1950 or pre-1965, 1961. That requires an established aristocracy. And he makes the point that it's not just an aristocracy, but an edified aristocracy, which every civilization has aristocrats of some sort, or it at least has oligarchs, but it has an upper class, which is tasked, or it has the implicit duty of leading the civilization or leading the society, because the rich ones, the aristocrats or the oligarchs, they have the funds and to some extent the leisure to pursue the higher things, to understand the philosophy, to be greater, to be higher educated in the higher things, to understand what is right and wrong politically, philosophy, what works, what doesn't work, and to fund such goods as art, music, and other public benefits for the middle and lower classes of society who don't have the time to create art of that sort or to research philosophy. The masses rely on the upper crust to produce those things and to lead the culture, to guard especially, and also to lead the culture through the art that they produce and the ideas that they espouse. That's their duty as the to whom much is given, much will be expected. And that was a precept that was held in the South, especially, that the aristocracy in those times, Southern aristocracy, upheld. They were loyal to the people in their locale, to their land. There's stories about plantation owners or just different agricultural barons in the South, if you could call them barons, but just a couple of these aristocrats would, through their own wealth, their own profit, they would set up little towns. They would literally build towns for their workers and for their the people who the lower classes who helped in these agricultural endeavors. They would build houses. They would build facilities and installations for the people. So they had this sense of loyalty and duty to the people that were financially less well off than them, people that were in the lower classes financially, and it was because they were rooted in family, in the land, in the blood, in the soil. That's the difference between an aristocrat and an oligarch. An oligarch, which is what we have now, the closest thing we have to an aristocracy now is these oligarchic or these technocratic oligarchs who don't have any connection to blood or soil, at least not American blood, American soil. They don't necessarily have a connection to any particular blood or soil. They're transnationalists. And so we need an aristocracy, and an aristocracy is good. Well, specifically, a Christian aristocracy is good because it has a sense of duty to the people that they live amongst and the land that they live amongst, their stakeholders. And they also, they're edified in their philosophy and in their religious precepts. And so they are good leaders. They produce good, edifying contributions to the civilization, to society. And we need that if we're ever going to, we need to somehow rebuild an aristocracy, an edified one, if we're ever going to find a way out of this mess. Because we have to have steady, consistent, loyal, edified leaders, basically, who have some wealth to produce these things and to continue to carry our civilization forward, and not just to stop in time. So, yeah, aristocracy is important. It died in the Civil War. The aristocrats of the South were exhausted financially and killed off and whatnot during that war, and they were the guardians more than anybody else of the edified Christian, civilization that we had in America. The culture of honor, the culture of gentility, the culture of Christian moral values, of your duty to your underlings. That's the thing is, yes, the underlings have a duty to the landlord or to their boss and their the work that they do, but there's a reciprocal duty, which is forgotten. It's definitely forgotten nowadays in the modern society. The idea of the duty of the upper crust to the underlings. They have it in a way, but they still have it. You see like Bill Gates investing in his so-called charitable foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, trying to do their so-called charitable work. Really, it's just trying to, just pervert our educational system and indoctrinate all of us. But they have their so-called, philanthropic work they do where they look like they're trying to help the people. Maybe they really think they are helping us, but I don't think they do think that. But anyways, so they kind of appear to do it still. But back then it was a Christian conception of your duty to your underlings, to the classes beneath you, the masses. And so we've lost that. And and that was, again, it was especially in the South that genteel, honorable Christian aristocracy existed, because in the North, not even so much the Midwest, but more so in New England, that's where the term Yankee derived from, was these grifters, these merchants, doggone merchants, I tell you, these money changers, who came from Europe and really everywhere across the world, because that's where all the big ports were. That's where that was the insertion point, over in New York and Boston in New England, where all of these foreign ideologies, philosophies, and even religious precepts came from, across Europe, especially the Marxism, the skepticism, and just some of these other degenerate philosophies that corrupted our culture, undermined our culture, and especially in the early 1900s and going forward. These ideas, their insertion point was through the ports and the immigration ports in New England, and of course the universities in that immediate area, where these professors and avant-garde cultural elites inserted themselves in our nation. And once the South was out of the picture to guard against those foreign, subversive philosophies and degenerate ideas, once that bulwark, the Southern aristocracy, which was our guardian of our civilization's edification and culture, were gone, it left kind of a power vacuum, and these Northerners I won't say Northerners, these transnationalists in New England, they had free reign to propagate their ideas, and yeah, so that was a big problem. So that's a big question that we don't have time to really get into how to fix that, I don't think, but that's something to look at, is how do we reestablish an edified, genteel, dutiful aristocracy that has that component of blood and soil, not just rich people, but loyal rich people who are good rich people. So yeah, sorry about that long rant, but that's speaking on behalf of Natty Bumpo. He might have said something like that if he was here. But
Yeah, I think those are some great points. I think most people.
I think I put Larry to sleep there. He had to take a second to wake up.
Yeah, no, I'm totally awake. But I think most people, even commentators who are to the left of us, would certainly, or even people who are antithetical to us, would concede that the antebellum South was certainly more representative of what we might construe as identitarianism, than the North, and certainly a lot of people would associate the North, with the things, exactly the things of your that you said, with commerce, with this sort of globalization, as far as that could have occurred in that era. I mean, certainly there were aspects of the antebellum South that were global, but definitely not to the extent of the North. And there was a sense of, as you also mentioned, there was a sense of continuity and perpetuity of the white Anglo-Saxon sort of Protestant nature of Dixie, versus the kind of still European but ultimately a melting pot of the North. So there are a lot of, I think, good tropes that are contained in making this contrast. There's, I think, there's a lot of lessons to be derived, and certainly it's an extensive treatment of the topic is certainly warranted in some point in the future. But I think, yes, antebellum South identity, the North globalism, I think that's not kind of an unrealistic, very rough translation into kind of the modern parlance, and what we're griping with currently.
Yes. What about you, Meat Cutter? What do you think?
Well, absolutely. The South as a nation, as a separate people, in a sense, from the the greater America, they have a different sense of identity than we do in other parts of the nation. We have some Southerners in our group here, but I mean, some of us Yankees can't really relate to it, and that's going to be our struggle, dealing with these divisions and finding a common ground despite them, moving forward. Because I mean, us in the North, we have a fragmented identity. It's a lot more visible than it is in some parts of the South that are, the entire counties are 98% white, and with deep heritage. We don't really have that in any other, in rural areas in the North, at least not to the same extent. I mean, you have families that have lived there for a while, but it's in most cases the land is bought and sold pretty frequently, and these people have still been indoctrinated by similar degeneracy to their counterparts in urban areas. They've all gone through the same public school brainwashing, which has been influenced by Frankfurt School Marxists. So it's we're going to need to find our identity a lot more. We're gonna have to work harder to find our identity than those in the South. But we can learn a lot from those in the South and those active in the Southern nationalist movement, whether we agree with them or not. They have experience with this, and they understand what it means to be a people, more so than I think other parts of our nation. So hopefully we can hear from some of them in the future. Some of the people down there spearheading that cause, just to get their perspective. But yeah, it's good points.
Yeah, it's definitely true what you say, that they were kind of their own people. And Natty Bumpo, he's a really smart guy. We're gonna get him out here. He just, for whatever reason, we try to get him on the Google Hangouts here, and he can hear some of us, but he can't hear all of us, and so he always has to drop out at the last minute because he doesn't want to ruin the show with the technical difficulties. But doggone, I want to get him on here because he's a sharp fella. But yeah, but anyways, he made the same kind of point as you, Meat Cutter, that there's kind of 6 separate peoples in the U.S., or there were historically. Even just in the you could kind of even distinguish it regionally. There was South, New England, Midwest, Northwest, Southwest, and I don't know if did I leave something out there. Southwest, South, New England, Midwest, Northwest. Maybe I left one out, but there's 5 or 6 regional groups that they knew that they were different from each other, but they were, they had enough in common, in the Constitution and in the Declaration, to come together at the right times to fight necessary battles. It's like, all right, these doggone Yanks, I got some issues with them. I don't like a lot about them, but we've got something in common here that we can work together for a minute to get this done. But after the Civil War, they were not really allowed to kind of move on and kind of reassume and kind of continue to move forward with the Southern culture. The Northern, especially the Northeastern New England culture, was imposed on them, because nobody had any money to fund alternative, media major media publications or essentially counter propaganda. And they didn't. The Northeast, the New Englanders didn't send down the industry down there to allow the wealth to really increase in the South like it was increasing in the Northeast. So they, with money comes power, and the Northeast was able to increasingly impose the Northeastern culture on them. And so there was, so as long, so long as we continue to act as if there's only one mono culture or one, people in the U.S., so to speak, even among European ethnics or whites, so long as we try to artificially curtail these regional identities, it's not going to work. We have to allow for these regional identities. It's a regional nation. And Natty Bumpel also made a good point to me about how because we were having a debate about, how much are the baby boomers at fault, and I said that, they definitely made the decision. They were adults during the 60s and 70s to, they certainly weren't raised with those values to be, promiscuous, drug-using degenerates. So they made a decision to succumb to the temptations and the degenerate invitation of the Hollywood, the media entertainers, certain merchant class. And so I was saying, okay, it's the boomers' fault. They made these decisions to abandon the virtues that were instilled in them by their parents. But Natty Bumpel also made a good point that, after World War II, I mean, the so-called greatest generation, they were exhausted by the war effort. They just kicked Germans and Japanese asses twice. It was very exhausting for them to come back from those wars.
Well, thank God for that, right?
Yeah, right. I'm not saying I liked, who we were fighting, but they were exhausted from that whole war effort, and so they weren't as formidable to resist. They weren't as formidable to resist these foreign cultural incursions. They weren't, kind of like, in a way, I think they kind of had a little bit of a live and let live mentality during the post World War II period. They just wanted, it's like, all right, I saw some nice things over in France. They had some nice buildings. They had a nice quaint culture. They seemed pretty good. Looks like they got some good ideas. I'm really freaking tired. I just got killing people and seeing war. Fine. Let's let some Germans come over. Let's let some French come over, even though they've got some of these cultural Marxist ideologies, that were kind of hard to understand. But they let their guard down to an extent, and we let these subversives into our nation. The people that certain class of people who propagated the cultural Marxism. We won't name who they are, but they came over here, and
no one actually knows who they are.
Right. It's impossible to know.
Yeah.
How could you know that? So I mean, why would I say? I have no idea. All right. But yeah. So they were tired, and things changed. But mostly the problem was these elite places of so-called higher learning, the universities, again, at those insertion points at the ports in New England. And so one thing going forward that we should discuss is going forward, if we're ever able to right the ship, Lord willing, and we do establish an edified civilization again, how would we guard against these sorts of subversive incursions? If we could go back in time, how would we have, or what should have been done to deal with these subversives? How do you guard against that? Is it just inevitable entropy, where you have these sneaky weirdos who come in here with their bad ideas, and they just kind of, there's this rot from within? I mean, nothing lasts forever here on Earth, so that it may just be entropy to an extent. But what could we do better to guard against, or what kind of institutions could we have going forward to guard against these Marxists, these skeptics who just rot our civilization from the top down? They corrupted the upper class through the universities, and it trickled down through cultural degeneracy to the masses eventually through entertainment media and just public education. So probably a topic for another time, because I think we're about at our limit here. I think we're either at or just over an hour. So do you guys have any other thoughts, or can we wrap it up?
I think we brought up some good points tonight. It's a good discussion, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we brought in some good metaphorical thinking, and I think that is the type of thinking that will move us forward. So
Yeah, right on. Got
Amen, brother.
Got some springboards for topics of discussion next time. Talk about how to guard against cultural incursions in the universities and places of higher learning going forward in the future, if we ever get the reins of power again.
And maybe we'll find those mysterious people, people at the end of the rainbow with their hands in a pot of gold. Maybe we'll find them.
Who
Maybe
could
we'll
possibly
find out who they are.
be promoting this?
Maybe something to do with how to guard against these cultural subversions to the university is to observe certain patterns in who these propagators are, and you can kind of picture it like a you've got like a target, and you can kind of put that target on a certain person.
Yeah,
and that's just metaphorically speaking. We don't advocate violence. That's one thing we want to make clear is we absolutely oppose violence. This is just more like you could say it's like a target philosophical critique, against aimed at unfriendly ideas, unfriendly philosophies. That's what
we're trying to foster a culture of critique. That's exactly what we're trying to do. Yeah.
Exactly. All right. So got Meat Cutter, Larry, and Big Mac here signing off. Appreciate y'all tuning in. And we'll be back again about 9:30 next weekend, Sunday, 9:30 Eastern time with the next episode of Reactionary Grounds. We hope by then to have our buddy Philippe bring some of his Lithuanian friends on who are kind of into the identitarian circles over in Europe, and they can give us their input and continue our discussion from here. Hopefully get a few more people on who couldn't make it this time. And also in the near future, we're going to try to line up one of our first large-scale kind of meetups of some of these anonymous dissident right figureheads who lead the Facebook pages, Twitter handles, and YouTube channels. Some of the people, hopefully, in that list that we mentioned in the first episode, get them on here to put our heads together and see what kind of ideas we come up with for our broadly spoken movement, so to speak, how to go forward. So we'll see how that goes. But God bless you all. God bless you, brethren. And thanks for tuning in. And we will see you next weekend.
All right. Good night. All right.
Peace be upon you, white brothers.
You as well.